Amtrak serves a wide variety of locations across the United States and Canada. Stations can range from large terminals like New York's Penn Station or dinky flag stops like Thurman, West Virginia. Passenger numbers can also vary from tens of millions per year to only a few hundred per year. But what are the reasons for such low numbers in some areas? Well, today I'm going to discuss 5 of Amtrak's least used passenger stations and shed some light on the history of their decline in ridership. I'll be using the most up-to-date ridership numbers I can find, those being from Amtrak's 2019 fiscal year, which spanned from October of 2018 to September 30th of 2019. At number 5, there's Albion, Michigan. Hosting 447 passengers, it's a bit of a drop from 883 in 2018, and an even bigger drop from 2,194 in 2017. With that said, this is Amtrak's least used station in Michigan, and it's currently served by some of the Wolverine trains. The building was constructed and opened in 1882 by the Michigan Central Railroad, later fully integrated into the New York Central. For a time, this station was competing with the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway Station, which operated until the 1920s. Albion was then abandoned and stripped of service when Amtrak took over in 1971, but service returned in 1975 with the Wolverine. Local community groups then restored the depot into its original condition in the mid-1980s. Albion has always remained a less traffic station on the Pontiac to Chicago line and just simply hasn't been a very popular stop. Next up is scenic Port Kent, New York. This shelter station hosted 402 passengers in 2019, a slight increase from 380 in 2018 actually. The Delaware and Hudson Railway first built a freight station in Port Kent sometime between 1875 and 76, and later a passenger shelter in 1911. The D&H's Laurentian train would pass through the hamlet, but proper passenger service wouldn't begin until April 24, 1977, with Amtrak's Adirondack. The old D&H depot would eventually be removed and replaced with a small shelter and platform in 1989. Port Kent was added as a stop along the route to allow passengers to make a connection with the Lake Champlain Transportation Company ferry between Port Kent and Burlington, Vermont. However, the ferry only operates between May and October, so Amtrak only makes a stop when the ferry is in operation. With the stop being seasonal and the hamlet not being very populous, this earns the Port Kent station stop a section on this list. Number 3 is ironically, perhaps the most famous station on this list. Located deep within the Appalachian Mountains is Thurman, West Virginia. The town hosts a population of only 4 individuals, but the depot saw 364 passengers in 2019. Thurman's history spans back to 1873 with Captain W.D. Thurmond. He had acquired 73 acres of land along the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway's newly completed main line as payment for a surveying job. As the town gained some traction, it became established as the heart of the New River Gorge and its rich coal deposits. Thurman would be formally incorporated in 1900, named after the captain himself. A 2-story wood-frame passenger station would be built in 1904 as well. With the 20th century now underway, Thurman became a booming town from local coal mines. The CNO had established a sizable yard there to switch trains coming in from local mines into longer trains for further transport. Profits and freight numbers quickly surpassed that of Cincinnati, Ohio and Richmond, Virginia combined. Thurman by far had the largest coal revenues on the entire CNO system as well. Even more so, the town banks were even the richest in the entire state of West Virginia. Throughout the early 1900s, Thurman saw 15 passenger trains a day serving up to 95,000 passengers a year. This even included the CNO's premier George Washington train. The railroad was such an integral part of Thurman that the main row of businesses and homes were placed right in front of the CNO main line as opposed to a road. The town lacked any form of road access until 1921 even. While the population peaked in 1930 at only 462, the hotels and businesses were doing consistently well and overflowing with people. Success, though, was only temporary. As the Great Depression worsened, businesses closed up shop and 2 fires had destroyed several others. Automobile travel had also become much more popular throughout the 1930s and 40s, and the onset of new diesel locomotives also signaled the end of coal-fired trains. In 1931, the town bank closed and the last hotel had burned in 1963. Thurman had soon become a ghost town of just under 100 residents and dropping. As Amtrak took over service in 1971, Thurman lacked any passenger rail service until October 30th of 1977 with the introduction of the Cardinal. The station was now designated a flag stop. As the years went on, the CNO closed their Thurman offices in 1984, but on the bright side, Thurman was placed into a historical district and on the National Register of Historical Places. By this point as well, though, the depot was looking a bit rough. So, in 1995, the National Park Service acquired and restored the depot into acting additionally as a visitor center and museum. A yellow paint job would then be applied in 1999. In the present day, Amtrak's tri-weekly Cardinal continues to stop at the now tourist-driven, historical Thurman, West Virginia. Number 2, there's the small city of Montgomery, West Virginia. With a population of 1,529 and the Amtrak station hosting 275 passengers in 2019, this is a relatively unknown stop. A brick station building was built by the CNO in the early 1900s along the route of the George Washington. After Amtrak's takeover in 1971, service at Montgomery didn't resume until 1983 with the Cardinal. Since the original CNO depot was torn down in the 1970s to reduce property costs, the station was merely the original CNO platform with some lights. Eventually, though, in 2003, a metal canopy shelter was eventually constructed. Yet, the city is still served as a regular flag stop on the Cardinal in the present day. Before I move on to the number 1 least used station, an honorable mention is the now defunct Greenfield Village, Michigan station stop at a mere 82 passengers in 2006. This was down from 676 in 2005. Its ridership ranked below Thurman, West Virginia, and was the least used Amtrak station in 2006's fiscal year. Used by Amtrak starting in late 1995, it connected with Greenfield Village and the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan, and was only accessible to visitors of the museum. It was also a seasonal stop, lasting between April 15th and October 31st. The stop proved quite popular as in 1997, Greenfield Village saw 7,317 passengers. However, its popularity quickly waned, and after 2006, the stop was reserved for groups of 20 people or more only, with service ceasing altogether in 2014. The Greenfield Village stop, along with the nearby Dearborn station, would be replaced with the John D. Dingle Transit Center on the northwest end of the Henry Ford Museum. The platforms and any other signs of the Greenfield Village stop have since been removed. With that said, the new transit center has since seen 74,480 passengers in the past fiscal year. Quite the increase from what was the Greenfield Village, Michigan station stop. Finally, the least used station on Amtrak's entire system is located in Sanderson, Texas. Located hundreds of miles from any decent-sized city, Sanderson boasts a population of around 837, while the Amtrak station only saw 225 passengers in the entirety of the 2019 fiscal year. That's an average of less than 1 passenger per day. But how did it exactly get this way? The wooden depot was constructed in 1882 by the Southern Pacific Railroad. The design was a standardized SP design known as SP Common Standard Depot No. 3. It was built in parts in California and then shipped by rail to Sanderson to be assembled along the tracks. A few years later, though, in 1910, the depot was expanded upon its west end for a larger waiting room and adding a new ticket room, baggage room, and telegraph and railway express agency offices. Because of the building's isolated location, the depot also acted as an apartment for the station master, that of which was located on the second level. A large stone roundhouse and engine servicing facilities along with a yard were established, transforming Sanderson into a bustling railroad town. Sanderson eventually became ripe with cattle and sheep ranching in the early 1900s, leading up to high-value gas and oil production in the 50s. Sanderson managed to peak in the 1950s, possessing around 3,000 residents. On top of this success, Sanderson was built along the SP's Sunset route that stretched from New Orleans, Louisiana to Los Angeles, California. Trains like the Sunset Limited and Argonaut serviced the station throughout its SP days. Trouble, unfortunately, came soon after Sanderson's success, though. In June 1965, a flash flood destroyed much of the town and 28 people had died. Because of this, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built retention dams around the town. On top of a declining population, Interstate 10 was completed in the 1970s across Texas, bypassing Sanderson by a long shot. This replaced the in-town U.S. Highway 90 as the main roadway route across Texas. Ultimately, SP relocated their crew change base from Sanderson to Alpine, Texas in 1995. A good handful of people worked for SP in the area and thus had to pick up their things and move out or find work elsewhere. Even though Amtrak had continued the Sunset Limited route in 1971 through Sanderson and eventually included the combined Sunset Limited Texas Eagle route in 1981, it couldn't save the fate of the depot. After SP merged into Union Pacific in 1996, the remainder of the railroad buildings in the town had been removed and the depot was closed down. Amtrak continued to make a stop in Sanderson, but no passenger services could be provided. The depot quickly fell into disarray as vandalism and theft was common, leaving almost nothing left on the structure. In 2002, UP offered to hand over the depot to a group looking to save it, move it, and create a railroad museum, but due to local politics, the plan fell through. Strong efforts between 2010 and 2012 by the Sanderson Depot Association also failed. Sporadic attempts to save the depot had been conducted throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, including UP extending demolition dates to allow groups to raise money. It was estimated $100,000 would save the building. By late 2011, though, efforts to save the depot reluctantly waned, and in the depot's final days, it only saw dust and illegal immigrants waiting inside to hop on a freight train. The rare Amtrak passenger would avoid the building during bad weather too, instead waiting inside the nearby post office. Public support was slim to none, and soon enough, in October 2012, the depot was demolished. Fortunately, though, the Terrell County Memorial Museum saved fragments of the building and have them displayed amongst other local historical material and items. Other historical parts of Sanderson have been more fortunate, still continuing their long-standing life. The town is still served by Amtrak's tri-weekly Sunset Limited and combined Texas Eagle service, though the only semblance of a station are a platform, sign, and some overhead lights. While the depot may be gone, the spirit of Amtrak service to the small town of Sanderson, Texas has remained, even if it still remains as one of Amtrak's least used stations.